afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session on degrowth. My name's Loretta Roberts. I am co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Industry.Fashion, and it's my great honour to be hosting this panel for you this afternoon. We've got two outstanding speakers on this topic sitting here. I'm sure you know him. He's a regular, pouring himself a drink. It's Simon Platt, who is founder of SP&KO Consultancy and a leading expert on sustainable fashion, having worked for some of the biggest names in the industry. And from industry body WRAP, we have Mark Sumner, Textiles Programme Lead is Mark, and I've already had the pleasure of talking to these two about this subject before, and I know you're in for a treat this afternoon with what they've got to say. My intros were entirely inadequate, so I'm just going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and their roles within their respective organisations before we get into the meat of this topic. So Mark, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Oh, thanks very much. So I'll make it really brief. So I'm the Textile Programme Lead for WRAP. WRAP is the organisation that runs Textiles 2030, which is the government and industry-funded sustainability initiative. In terms of my background, I started off in sustainable textiles in 1990, something or other, a very long time ago. Some of you weren't even born then. In my sort of career, I've worked for M&S doing product development, but also led their sustainability Plan A initiative for textiles. I then spent 10 years working as an academic at Leeds University, trying to understand why consumers are all crazy. And now I'm working at WRAP, leading our initiative on textiles and how we make UK textiles more sustainable and profitable.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. Simon, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, so started back in 1985 working for Next in Sheffield in the shop, Saturday boy. Then moved down to the head office doing visual merchandise, eventually moved into buying, sourcing, product development. I was with Next for about 20 years and then set up as a small supplier. Used to supply Marks and Spencer's with swimwear and accessories. Eventually working in the outdoor group world, so I was working with Blacks and Millets and looking at brands and also developing own brands in that space. And then I was approached about 12 years ago now, 13 years ago by ASOS. And I thought I'd been approached by a cycling brand, which was ASOS, and thought, oh, that sounds cool. Anyway, it turned out to be ASOS, an online fashion platform for the sort of 20-somethings. But I thought, what an opportunity. So I headed up there, what we give a title, responsible sourcing. You know, it's about that development into being more responsible, being more sustainable around people, planet, but also where we sourced, why we sourced there, what volumes we bought, how we tried to tackle the agenda of delivering profit, but doing it in a more sustainable and more responsible way. I left ASOS a couple of years ago. I co-founded a startup called Recom, which was around empowering brands and customers and retailers to look at recovering products from consumers and try and get them back into that circle, whether that's repair, resale, rental, what opportunities, including recycle or downcycle or upcycle. And you're going to hear from Stuart later, in a minute about that. I've been working with that business for a couple of years, but I've also set up a consultancy called SP&KO with Kathy, who's here today, where we're going to work with brands, retailers, suppliers, anyone that could use our help in sort of seeing them forward on this journey, really. So that's kind of where I am today.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Well, you can agree with me then that we've got two storied experts with us. So this topic is interesting to me. Can moving towards an economy of degrowth transform sustainable fashion? Now, if we're to listen to our Chancellor of the Exchequer at the moment, her buzzword at the moment, despite her best efforts to the contrary, is growth. It's growth. So in a market where we're all looking for growth, how is that compatible with degrowth? Are those two things in conflict with each other? Mark, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting challenge. So absolutely, the industry, brands, retailers, the Chancellor wants growth, and that because of all the obvious reasons. The challenge that we have within textiles, but many other sectors, is the way that we do growth at the moment leads to social and environmental harm.
Yes.
So we have this real big challenge in terms of climate change, in terms of water consumption, chemicals. We have challenges around modern slavery in the supply chain. We have challenges around what we do with waste. Huge amounts of textiles waste being created. So the degrowth conversation would apply if we do business as usual. So if we carry on doing the things that we're doing,
yes,
we have to stop growth. because of the damage it's creating. But actually what we're talking about more broadly, those people involved in sustainability and what we're talking about at WRAP is actually growth is okay if we do it in a different way. And what's really interesting when we think about the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, it is enshrined in SDG 8 that economic growth is a good thing, but it's about how we do it in a different way. So we've been talking about understanding how we decouple growth from harm. So I would argue that actually what we should be focusing on is how we decouple growth from all of those bad practices that are going on within the industry and really incentivize the good practices. And there's some really good practices going on across the industry. It's how we motivate the whole of the industry to move in that direction of going, let's deliver fashion to consumers, let's deliver business growth, but do it in a way that is better for the environment and reduces social harm.
Thank you. What do you feel about that, Simon? I know you've got strong views.
I mean, really, what Mark, what he said, basically, is the truth. And I think it's very simplistic for someone to stand and say, we want growth. And if we continue to grow, as Mark said, in the way we are currently, or have been growing, it's been very wasteful, it's been very exploitative, it's been very harmful. I think we're talking about an economic and a responsible growth of something which is for everyone, whether it's people involved in the supply chain, whether it's for shareholders, whether it's something that benefits the planet. If we were to continue to grow, if we took her at her words and said, right, let's just carry on growing, this industry, and I said yesterday, I'm not massively proud to be part of an industry that still exploits people and planet for financial gain. If we can find a way, and now with tech and innovation and network and consumer awareness and brand loyalty and storytelling, to grow in a responsible way, being less harmful, less impactful, and looking at doing it differently, growth doesn't have to be a bad thing. So that I think it kind of reiterates what Mark said. They don't have to be a conflict. Decoupling irresponsible behaviour and growth through just a capitalist, let's sell more stuff, and that way we'll obviously make more profit. Well, that's proven not to be the case. Most businesses that have grown like that have seen their profits really start to take a hit. So it just needs a different way of looking at it. But it's difficult when someone says something, and in our industry, when a CEO or a CFO puts out to their team, we need to grow and we need better prices. Believe me, the message that goes out there and that ends up downstairs amongst these suppliers are not long conversations about how do we do this better. It goes straight for the point, which is I need a better price, I need to grow, I need it cheaper, I need it quicker, and And it's like we've got to change the way that we behave within this industry to change the behaviours of the industry.
You touched on a community of people there, and I wanted to just probe this with you before we get into the rights and wrongs of the model as it stands. But one of the key challenges that a company that is listed perhaps or has institutional investors is the shareholders. You mentioned them. And the whole capitalist system, I suppose, is predicated on the shareholder. The CEOs, boards, they are beholden to the shareholders. Their whole purpose is to deliver value to the shareholders, and actually, in some cases, you end up being thrown in prison if that's not what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? It's that. So how on earth do you change this situation where people who are investing in companies just expect growth and expect dividends? And is there a way of educating them to understand that maybe it is actually more about profit, as you say, Simon, and not just about top-line growth? I know it's a big question, but what are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when we talk about shareholders. Like most things, there's going to be good shareholders and bad shareholders. And I think the good ones are those that take a long-term view of understanding where their risks are and where their profits are. If we carry on in the route that we're going in terms of climate change and understand the impact that's going to have in terms of soil health, I don't know how we're going to end up talking about soil health, but let's think about soil health. You're all wearing cotton that is grown in the soil. What we know is if we carry on in the same direction as we're going, that soil health is going to deteriorate, which means we're going to have less cotton available, which means the price of cotton is going to go up. As a shareholder, your profit is based on how much it costs for your raw materials. So those shareholders that really understand the challenges, the intricacies of climate change and the impacts that they're having will realise that to do things better in terms of the environment also have that potential for payback of actually keeping costs down.
Yeah.
So shareholders who go into the long-term view, who really understand the industry and all of the components of the industry, I think have a much better idea of what responsibility looks like.
Yes.
Shareholders who are thinking, I'm going to buy into this company and I want a 3-year return on my investment, going to be in that situation that we're talking about where it's price. That's all we're interested in.
Yeah.
So what we've got to work out with the shareholders as well as other stakeholders is how do we get that long-term view embedded to make it work?
I think so. I mean, Simon, you've worked for big retailers. You're consulting for them now, I imagine. Is this a conversation that comes up?
I think it is. I mean, it's been given a term. It's called green growth.
Yeah.
So it's actually been termed as something. But like Mark said, it's the smarter. It's working smarter, not necessarily, well, and a bit harder as well. But understanding that actually, if you're investing in a company that is not following the trajectory that we know consumers are going, laws and legislations that are going to force activities that because we're not going to take care of this on our own. We need a big foot up the backside, and that is coming this industry's way. And it's coming because it's needed. There are many that don't need it, but there's a hell of a lot that do need it. So that's going to force an action. So why would you invest in something that you know is going to fall foul and therefore not grow and not be profitable and not pay you a dividend? So it's about understanding and having a bigger picture. Like again, Mark said, if you're in for a couple of 3 years and you just want a massive return, then I probably wouldn't touch this industry anyway. but if you really are looking to invest in something, then you've got to understand what's going on in the industry, what the challenges are, what the opportunities and the new things are that will represent what we are terming as green growth, responsible growth, something that growth comes, like I say, it's shared throughout the whole ecosystem of the industry rather than just the shareholder.
Yeah.
We're as a what we call a species, as what we are, we're not very good, and we've entered a race to the bottom, and whether you believe it or not, it's happening, and we need to start changing the way we behave, consume, and understand what growth looks like across everything we do. But I think this industry has a huge opportunity to get hold of this now. There are brands that are chatting. People like Nick, who sat in the audience today, who's looking at exactly how that works for a brand like Neem, London.
Yeah.
So massive opportunities. So it's smart. It's been smart.
I mean, essentially, what would you say, in a nutshell, is wrong with the traditional fashion model as it stands? And then we'll talk about some of the potentially interesting solutions, such as that which Nick's exploring, for example. So
the model is broke. We know it's very antiquated. We've kind of got a horse and cart model of bricks and mortar. That, we established production, and then we moved offshore, and then we started having more seasons. It used to be spring, summer, autumn, winter. Then it was, we're at the point now where there's nothing, it's just stuff.
New in this week.
New in this week, for some brands, this day. So there isn't that. What we've done is we've bolted a jet engine onto the top of the horse and cart and sent it off. Well, all that's done is kill the horse, and the cart's gone flying in all sorts of directions. So it's broken. Yeah. But with tech, with innovation, with regulation, and with a consumer now becoming more aware and wanting that individualism as well, I think there's an opportunity to see businesses thrive that focus on giving something and telling that consumer why they should shop with you and why that they are what they are and why they do what they do, and building a brand and a loyalty and a story. And I think that's definitely the opportunity. It's going to be very difficult for big brands to continue to stay relevant unless they are smarter in what they do. And I think we will see, unfortunately, in the coming years, quite a few familiar names. I won't say on the high street, because it's with the e-commerce side of things, it's blended now, but in that space, they will disappear because they've run their time and something else has replaced them, and they're no longer relevant, no matter how they try. So it's sad in a way, but like anything, you sometimes have to weed the garden to get the good stuff to grow stronger.
No, that's very true, and I think we are seeing that now, sort of post-pandemic, where some of the old school sadly left us, but better stuff seems to be coming through. What about you, Mark? What do you see as the fundamental issue that we should be addressing?
I think Simon talks about this idea of being smarter, and I think there's two aspects that I sort of reflect on. So having started in the industry many years ago, working for an organisation that really understood what it was about, there's two things that stand out. One, I think we've forgotten what clothing and what fashion does for individuals. And clothing is not about keeping us dry or keeping us warm. It's much more of a relationship between the individual and that piece of clothing.
Yes.
And if we focus on that, if we get to understand that in more detail and work harder on supporting individuals to have that relationship with clothing, we can make a big step forward. People will buy less. They'll use those clothes, those pieces better and for longer. So there's a real challenge in terms of understanding how we buy and fulfill the fashion requirements of consumers of today.
Yeah.
The second thing is aligned with that. It's understanding what the fashion industry, the textile industry is all about, and how we exploit new innovation and technologies. I spent a huge amount of my time going to cotton farms, to spinning mills, to fabric mills, to dye. I have to say, I was a bit of a textile geek. I probably am still a bit of a geek. But what I got from that was actually a real understanding of how you can tap into all the fantastic knowledge and expertise that's across the whole of the industry and bolt it together to deliver what the consumer needs, but do it in a way that's decoupled. And I think those two things are missing. This idea of understanding consumer and understanding what fashion does, and also understanding what textiles is all about. We need more geeks out there creating these opportunities to do that decoupling that we've talked about at the start, to actually find a way of doing things in a different way, in a smarter way.
Outside of the sourcing side of things, we have seen actually in the past few years a huge boom in new models of retail, broadly known as re-commerce, obviously resale and rental. Do you see those having a big impact in the future, Mark? I mean, I've got question marks myself around some of it, but what do you feel?
A lot of the work we're doing at WRAP at the moment is focusing on what we call these circular business models, and reuse rental is a cornerstone of that. And we know that there's a pathway to make those successful. But I would argue, and again, this is going back to, I guess it's going back to when I was doing research on understanding consumers, there is no one size that fits all within fashion. Different sectors, different models, different ways of doing it, different ways of connecting with consumers. And I can see there's growth for reuse.
Yes.
But it will be for certain parts of the segmentation that's out there.
Okay.
There are got to be other solutions that we need to work on. And one of the interesting things about reuse is thinking about who is successful with reuse. If we think about the model as it stands at the moment, we'll have a brand developing a garment, creating it, getting the supply chain set up, and selling that garment to a consumer. The brand has done all the hard work in terms of making that garment. The consumer then uses it and then decides, I'm going to sell it or dispose of it. It goes somewhere else. Someone else is getting the value of that. So these reuse platforms are getting the value. So brands are going, hang on a minute, why am I doing all the work?
Yes.
But I'm not getting that sort of return in terms of the second, third, fourth sale.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're looking at now is to really try and understand, is there a model that allows a brand to do all the hard work, and it's a lot of hard work, isn't it, Simon, in terms of product development and getting it really right, to then say, how do I bring that back in? How do I maximise that? If you can find the solution to that, I think that the reshoe model will accelerate hugely.
We're starting to see that now, aren't we? We had all these startups doing it as third parties, and now they're starting to integrate with the retailers and brands themselves, aren't they? So that they can keep that value within their business. Like you say, you've gone to all the trouble of making it and selling it, then it's gone. You know, you should be part of that full life cycle of that, for good and bad. What's your view on those types of models, Simon?
Well, I mean, you can see already that on brands like Vinted and so on, you know, these are meant to be vintage or resale platforms, yet their biggest sellers are Shein and H&M, and you know, it's product on the resale the same day the product's in the store.
Yes.
It's already that model's wobbling a bit. And I do, obviously, with being involved in what I did with Recom, was about empowering the brands. You know, you sell this stuff, you're going to need. Why wouldn't you want a second or a third bite of the cherry at resale? Why wouldn't you repair it so they may come back to you? Why wouldn't you look at opportunities to recycle materials. Obviously, those materials that you start with have got to be better so that they're worth something when you pull them back in.
Yes, true.
You can't just keep turning rubbish around that we can't do anything with.
Yeah.
But then, you're going to want access to recycled materials, because in future you'll have to hit certain points to be able to sell or to be able to do these things. So why wouldn't you want to own that? But right now, for the brands and retailers, they are so... We said
the financial modelling is not predicated on this, is it?
And the margins in it for recovery, recycle, it's not scaled yet. So the volumes haven't created the economics of it yet. So it really is the kind of thing that brands that are breathing a bit and thinking, I can look at this, I can, rather than I'm just staying alive because everybody's shooting at me.
Yes,
it's a messy space.
Yeah.
But it's definitely the smart move to be part of that network and not just allow your hard work, effort and energy to just disappear and line someone else's pockets.
I think that's a really sensible way of looking at it. And it is tough at the moment, isn't it? Like you say, so it's a really good analogy. Everybody is just shooting at you from all directions, and some of this stuff might be just put in the too difficult box, mightn't it?
It is now.
But
shouldn't be, but when you're struggling to keep your nose above water and someone's pulling you under, the last thing is you want someone from your ESG department telling you about something you've got to be ready for in 2 years' time.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
exactly.
drowning.
I mean, let's talk.
It's difficult.
I know, but let's talk about it, because both of you will be very familiar with, I hope anyway, impending legislation, what it might look like. Mark, what's on the horizon? Is it helpful? How are you working to ensure that any legislation that comes through is helpful and not too punitive, because we don't want that, do we?
Policy can play a really important role in the conversation we're having here, but it has to be the right policy. It has to be progressive policy. And within our space at WRAP, as an NGO, we have that independence where we can be listening to what industry is saying, all parts of industry, but also listening to what policymakers are saying, and also have our own agenda in terms of climate change is something that has to be resolved and resolved quickly. So there's lots of conversations around policy. The one that's standing out more than anything else is extended producer responsibility.
Yes.
So this is the idea, as an organisation, placing something on the market, you have a responsibility for how that product is then used and what happens to it in its lifetime. That currently, in many parts of the world, has been treated as a taxation. It's a levy that's just applied. It's a penny a garment or 50p a garment, whatever it is, with no sort of progressive, innovative approach to that. And what we're saying, because what we're hearing from industry and what we're seeing in terms of the modelling that we're doing at WRAP, is that we need eco-modulation. What we should be doing is supporting those organisations, those people that are putting product onto the market that are made of sustainable materials or made through processes that reduce the carbon footprint, who are making products that are really durable and will last for a long time, or engaging in the markets that we've been talking about take back and being able to recycle those or reuse those. So EPR, with this idea of eco-modulation, this idea of incentivising good practice, we think is really important. And it does two things. It could do two things. One, it drives change in behaviour in terms of what brands are doing, which ultimately will lead to a change in behaviour, a subtle one, but a change in behaviour in terms of consumers and what they're doing with fashion. The other thing that it does is it punishes those organisations that don't take responsibility financially. And the financial sort of stick is the one that is the most painful for organisations. And what's interesting about the punishment is the idea with EPR is you take the money from those organisations and you reinvest it in innovation, you reinvest it in new green opportunities. So those that are doing good get benefit, those who are not doing good pay the cost and subsidise what's going on. Now, in terms of where we are with EPR, really challenging area at the moment. We don't know whether EPR for textiles is something that government is going to drive. But in terms of what we're doing at WRAP, we're going, well, you know what, if government aren't going to drive it, we should be driving it. So we're talking about this idea of a voluntary EPR system. So we're trying to work out how we can work with brands to get them to pay a tax and support what's going on in the industry. It's a tough one.
Tough sell right now.
Real tough sell. But it's really interesting. We had our Textile Summit 2 weeks ago, the Textiles 2030 Summit, and we were talking about voluntary EPR. And when you lay it out in terms of what the benefits could be against what the costs could be, people are starting to come round to the idea of going, okay, I think I understand how this could work. So there is this churn going on at the moment, that policy, government-led, long-term, we think we know what needs to be done, but we can't wait. So what we're doing at WRAP is going, we need to accelerate this.
But it's smart, right? Because if you do come up with a voluntary scheme that is working, is sensible, does all the right things, when it comes to legislation being imposed, you're ahead of it.
Absolutely.
And you've got a model there that you can prove works, right?
And in terms of policy development, most policymakers need to see the evidence to know that that policy delivers the outcome that they're looking for.
Yeah.
So without having some sort of test bed,
Yeah.
without having a voluntary approach, it makes it even less likely that we get the EPR policy that everyone's crying out for.
I know, Simon, you're often off to the House of Commons. I feel like last time I saw you, you were toddling off there to give them your 2 pence worth. What's your thoughts on impending legislation, how it might work?
I think as we were saying, it needs to be the right legislation. We need to incentivise it. We use the word tax, and immediately everyone's like, I don't want any more of that stuff. Well, none of us do. But we're happy to invest or contribute to a pension. So it's just how we see it. This is something. And as Mark says, if we can use the stick where it's needed but get more of the carrot, then we'll start to get scale. And this is what we've been saying, and luckily government is listening to people like Mark, listening to WRAP and listening to other industry experts to make sure that they understand what kind of legislations are needed and how they need to be harmonised with other global initiatives. France put out a big statement about fast fashion tax. They didn't really know what they were saying other than they just want... Really... And now they're kind of backing down on it because they don't know they didn't really know what they were talking about. No. So it's kind of like, you've got to really understand what, if you chuck that stone in the water, there's so much going to happen, and you really need to know the intricacies of the industry to make the right decisions and right choices. But government is listening. We've got a lady called Mary Cray, who's in government now.
Like
she used to be the chair of the ETI. She's now on the body with DEFRA, and she's looking at textile. She did the Fixing Fashion report. There's a lot of stuff being done. Yeah. Now, as she said to me when I bumped into her in Houston, God, we've got a bit of a hole to fill before we get round to this one. But they want to do stuff. So I think I'm hopeful and positive, because we've got people who I think understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, because there was a lot of activity, wasn't there? And then I think there was an election, there was COVID, there was
tons of noise around it all.
Yeah, and now we've had another election. Hopefully,
it's going to take time, but there's an appetite.
Get the focus soon. Yeah.
And there's a knowledge. We've been talking about how does green growth work? How do we create jobs? How do we create an economy? What's destroying it? Yeah. What's going to fuel it? And those are the things we need to look at as an industry, and what government need to support the industry with.
Okay.
But I guess one of the challenges with policy is we're running out of time.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember.
I was going to say,
25 years ago, people talking about climate change, is it real? And it's going to affect people in 20, 30, 40 years.
Yes.
We've wasted our time. Well, some of us have wasted our time, and we need to have action now.
Yes.
To try and unpick that sort of missed opportunity.
What would you say? We've got a room here full of people, brands large and small, I imagine. So that we don't waste any more time, what would you say is a parting piece of advice? You'll get to ask your own questions in just a moment, but just this last question from me is there a piece of advice you would give to the people in this room, both of you, on what actions they should be doing right now? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big one. I guess there's two things. One, ignore the myths that are out there. There are a load of myths about textiles. Textiles built on sweatshops. Textiles made in the UK has a lower carbon footprint. Textiles and some of the impacts associated with sort of fast fashion. These are myths. There are real challenges about the stuff that you hear out there about the impact that textiles has. And I'm not saying that there aren't any impacts. It's just that the data and the evidence that we look at suggests that we should be focusing on other areas. So one of the things I would say is be really careful about the myths that we hear out there. Fast fashion is not a brand.
No.
Fast fashion is a consumer behaviour. There are luxury brands who have fast fashion customers who go in every week and buy a new garment. They may wear it, dispose of it, and go and shop again next week.
Yeah.
It's a shopping behaviour.
Yes.
So understanding
It's
the
not a
myths
price
is a
point.
bit.
It's not a
Understanding the
price
myths is one thing. The other thing is, let's not reinvent the wheel. And if you go onto the WRAP website, there is a huge amount of information, guidance, toolkits around circularity, around take-back schemes. Embrace it, take it. It's there for free. That data and that information is there. So, you know, there is a lot of information out there that we can just tap into really quickly. But what it takes is individuals having responsibility and going, I'm going to do something different. This is really hard. You know, we know it's really hard, but it's about going out there and just really pushing it and trialing things and doing things differently.
Thanks, Mark. Simon, what's your final thought on
I guess
it?
the final thing is for any brands, anybody in this space, is make a start with it and don't try and do it on your own. Mark said there's a whole network. You can find people. I use the word competition. Talk to people in your space. Don't worry about them being competitors. They're dealing in the ESG space. They'll be happy to talk, share, learn. Whether it's 1% for the planet, you know, there's so much. You just got to lean in. And then if you are in that space and you're like, how am I going to get this through to the finance guys? Understand the commercials, not necessarily just it's the right thing to do, but it will be commercially harmful to our business not to do this.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a commercial opportunity to generate more business if we talk about this. So just think about how you're pitching, who you're pitching to, and what you're saying. But make a start. Go and explore and talk, and don't try and do it in silo. There's far too much knowledge out there for you to think, oh God, this is too, you know, this is too
complex,
this is too much for me to do.
Well, you've been amazing, both of you. I've really, really enjoyed listening to you, and I'm sure the audience has too. Before we make way for the next catwalk show, I think we have got 5 minutes or so for a few questions. Has anybody got a question? If so, please raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you. If you could let us know, we've got 2 questions here. So if you could just let us know who you are before you pose your question, that would be really helpful, please.
Hiya. So can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome.
Yes.
So in the context of this conversation, how would you exactly define growth? Because that word can take on many meanings, from market share, higher profit margins. So
Yeah, it's all of it. What is growth? Are you talking about growth for economy, growth for market, growth in profit, growth in volume of sales? It's everything. Growth is it's too easy to just, you know, give it that name. It's everything that's to do with how your business is going to develop and become something that's you know, that is going to get bigger, if you like. Growth is something that's going to get bigger. But you can't, I think it's not right almost to call it growth, because like you say, it means everything that you're going to do.
because sometimes a business can grow like market share at the expense of, you know, lower profit. So
Yes.
Massively, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is not
I mean,
good growth, is it? Very wasteful, very uneconomical, very commercially not very profitable. It's, you know, why would you want that?
But often brands, though, have sacrificed profit just to show that
Yes.
top level growth, particularly PLC level. You're sort of going,
Yes.
oh, we need to just show 25% growth every
Yeah.
quarter, whatever it might be. It's not
And
healthy.
we've lost a load of money.
Yeah,
Where did that become a thing?
yeah. It's not, well,
It's not right.
It's not
and
right.
usually that kind of growth, the reason it's not profitable is because it's very wasteful in its behaviour.
yeah.
So maybe we need a different term for this, but it's kind of, growth is the one that
growth
sticks.
is
Green
really-
growth is the one that's been
yeah.
given to us.
Yeah.
It's growth, but it's greener. Well, already that's a bit greenwashy, isn't it?
We'll have to
You
think
know.
of a new word
Yeah.
for Rachel Reeves to
That's
quote
your task
as
for the day.
Yeah.
Let's
If
come
you
up with a
can
new
think about
word.
that. It's a quiz for everybody. I think the lady behind you had a question, didn't you? Is that right? Yeah, always. Please go ahead.
Hello, as somebody who has a team who are stepping up to provide a solution for the economy and to drive new jobs and a solution in the UK, should extended producer responsibility be something that the brands benefit if they deal with a business like laundry, like ours? So rather than the brands just getting taxation there, should the benefit to be working with UK solutions?
Yeah.
And then we can grow our business, they can grow theirs.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm absolutely adamant that there's lots of really good practice going on in the industry, and that needs to be incentivised and some form of reward given to that. Now, if the reward, and this is where it gets a bit nuanced, isn't it? If the reward is less taxation than your competitors, that means you are slightly more profitable, I think that could work. And what's really interesting about EPR, if it's done in a progressive way, if it's done through this eco-modulation, it's about levelling that playing field. You know, we've all worked with brands, and I'm sure your brand is probably the same. We've all worked and invested in things like ethical trade, things like raw materials, like organic or fair trade. We've invested in our supply chains. We've invested into helping our consumers being greener in terms of their behaviour. Competitors don't have to do any of that. There is no legal mechanism. There is no mandatory requirement for them to do that. So you'll have on your bottom line your green costs, and you do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
And what hopefully things like EPR policy would do is say, well, everyone has to have that green cost to drive good behaviour, but if you're not going to do it, what you're going to do is you're going to get taxed for it. Now, in terms of where that taxation goes, currently the conversation is about, in France, it's about how you incentivise innovation. It goes to research bodies. It may be in the future what you have is a kickback to brands that are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
To help scale, maybe.
To help scale the sort of stuff that's going on, absolutely. But what we've got to get is an EPR progressive system that has the eco-modulation put in place and created first, to then be able to say, right, we can bring that income in and start thinking about incentivising, what levers can we use for incentivising, and how we actually maximise these levers for, I can't think of a better word than punishing bad behaviour.
No, carrot and stick, isn't it, really? Good behaviour should be rewarded somehow. I think if we're really quick, one more. I have my back to this side of the room. Has anybody got another question? Just one more over here, Armin. I think that will do it. Thank you.
Hi there, thank you for all the information. You mentioned the fact that fast fashion has been driven by consumer demand. Do you think that then consumers maybe have some onus in the problem that they've created potentially? And is there any limitations that we should put on consumers for overconsumption?
Good question.
Yeah, apologies if I gave the impression that fast fashion is the fault of the consumer. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is fast fashion is a buying behaviour that we see across
all
sectors,
price points.
all sectors.
Yeah.
There's a level of agency that we all have in terms of our behaviours. Absolutely. So we are, as individuals, have agency to think about our impact. But what's really interesting about fashion is almost driven by evolutionary psychology. And so I'm going to get in a bit sort of detail about this. But we like newness. We like the idea that we can actually promote ourselves. We like the idea of looking good. And that in many ways drives our behaviour. And lots of people have talked about, well, we should focus on changing that behaviour and making people less fashion driven. But when I put it out there and say this is evolutionary psychology, you are fighting tens of thousands of years of evolution about what makes us as a species.
Yeah.
So the challenge actually is back to the industry and say, what is the need? What are we trying to do with fashion? What do people want? Can we find a better way to deliver that newness that they want? And things like reuse, rental, there are really interesting opportunities around that really deliver that newness that we want. You've got to find the economic model that then works for business to support that. So there's some real big challenges in this understanding, this dynamic between brands, consumers, psychology, and how, as a species, we actually are really engaged in fashion. It's what we're all about.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. That's such a great way to finish. It's find a model that works for the way the consumer behaves and that is kind to the planet at the same time. I really appreciated your questions. They were excellent. Thank you so much, and thank you for your attention. We've got to make way for the catwalk now, so I will just finish by saying a huge thank you to... We're not on the catwalk. To Simon and Mark and to the team at Source for allowing me this opportunity, and thanks to all of you for your attention. So have a great show.
Cheers.